Hi there, and welcome to My Week. I'm Christy McDonald. We are so glad that you're with us tonight. The water, Detroit schools, and the presidential race, the three biggest stories around. We're going to talk about it tonight, but let's get you started with Flint and what's happening this week. After a meeting with the NAACP, the Michigan Civil Rights Commission is now investigating whether discrimination played a role in the crisis. Governor Snyder is asking for expanded Medicaid coverage for youth in Flint under the age of 21. The EPA issued an emergency order to take over water sampling in the city. This week, the Attorney General appointed 2 investigators into the Flint crisis, Attorney Todd Flood, former FBI head Andy Arena. And a Flint group filed a federal lawsuit saying the city is violating the Safe Drinking Water Act. Governor Snyder says he's now opening an office in Flint, and Flint Mayor Karen Weaver wants more done so residents will not have to pay their water bills.
I have told the Governor Snyder that Flint residents should not have to pay for water they did not and are not using. Therefore, he has set aside $3 million in his supplemental budget request to legislators to address the issue.
This is just the beginning. This is not the end of the process at all. So I'm pleased to say the Senate should be taking up the $28 million supplemental request for additional resources in Flint today and tomorrow in some fashion. The House passed it very quickly and with 106-0 is the vote last week. So progress is happening there, but this is the start of a longer-term process to make sure we are committed to Flint.
Donations of water and money are pouring in from around the country, from celebrities, major companies, and of course from the people of Michigan, as residents of Flint continue to pick up bottles of water to use every day. While the focus is on infrastructure and daily need, doctors and community members want more focus on the long-term needs of children. Doctors still don't know how many children have been exposed and to what extent. There are estimates that possibly 8,000 to 9,000 children have been exposed to lead. The Community Foundation of Greater Flint has started a fund to address the future health needs of families.
There are others who are trying to gather reliable data in terms of what the implications will be. You hear anything from 100 million to $1 billion. It's big, I can tell you that much. We're not talking thousands or hundreds of thousands. So we need to get to where we have significant resources that are here for the long haul.
There is a lot to get to: the role of the federal government here, questions of discrimination, and the criticism of emergency management. So let's bring our My Week contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Guys, you know, this story just continues. It's every day. Something different is changing with the situation in Flint. And then last night, MSNBC had a town hall meeting that they televised national for an hour. So it's become so interesting in what's going to happen. But I think, Nolan, let me start you with this, because I want to talk about the infrastructure, because the bottom line is, when is the water going to be safe to drink in Flint? And now the argument over how we get to that point, whether it's replacing service lines or whether it's just letting the process of recoding the pipes.
I talked to some water treatment experts this week, and if you look at the testing levels, they're coming back towards where they should be. It's going to take some time. You have to keep coating the pipes with the anti-corrosive that should have been in from the beginning. That's the fastest, safest way to address this problem. I know a lot of people saying, well, tear up the pipes. That's a long-term and process, very extensive process, and unnecessary. You could coat these pipes, and by now they should be getting toward the safe level if they're putting the right chemicals in. And, you know, who knows if they got that right yet.
Yeah, but you say unnecessary. And the fact that the city and the state, they don't even really know where all of the lead lines are right now. They're in the process of trying to figure that out. But you get back to that trust factor of when someone then says to you, Stephen, oh, no, we got it now. Everything is safe to drink. Go ahead. People are saying, gosh, I won't trust it until I see a new pipe in the ground.
Well, there's the trust factor, which is huge here. And people who trust government to take care of clean water now have a reason to doubt that that's always going to be the case. It is not unnecessary to replace these pipes. I mean, that's crazy. Steve, it is. Pretty quickly, this has got to turn away from the instant tragedy here to the long-term and much bigger picture problem, which is the infrastructure. The water infrastructure in this state is old and needs to be replaced. We have needed to do that for a really long time. No one has wanted to pay for it. No one has wanted to come to the voters to explain to them that we do need to pay for it. It's not going to be cheap. You're not going to be able to shift money around to do it. It's going to cost billions of dollars. And there's a report now out of Brookings in Washington about how nationally this problem is playing out. You're talking about $1 trillion to deal with repairs and backlog maintenance in the 152,000 water systems we have in this country. We have got to stop talking about, well, it's expensive. Of course it's expensive. Safety and welfare are expensive things. We have to start having the conversation about what's worth paying for and how we want to do it, instead of saying, well, we'll get by with another slapdash.
When you start digging out the pipes, and you're talking about years instead of weeks or months to get the people of Flint back.
Well, it's not an either or.
I'm not saying we don't have infrastructure problems. We do have infrastructure problems, and every time, for example, DWSD raises water rates by 10%, what happens? People go into meltdown mode. This isn't. I mean, there has not been a will. I'll agree with you on that. And we do need to fix our infrastructure. But we need to get people in Flint back drinking safe water.
But it's not an either or.
And the
of course
best
you'd
way
put the
to
chemical.
do that,
well, but they're doing that.
The best way to do that, exactly. And that's the first step. The first step is to get the water right. And then if you need to replace
Second
pipes,
step is for this governor to stop indulging the mad tax-cutting, austerity kind of approach to government and saying, well, we can have all the things we want. We don't have to pay for them. We can cut business taxes by $1.8 billion.
I think we need to move away from the hysterical response and say, what can we do?
Not an hysterical response.
I don't think it's a hysterical response, but I think that
hysterical.
you need to do this simultaneously. So you're going to recoat the pipes and you're going to make sure that you can get that water flowing. But at the same time, I need someone coming up with a plan saying, this is what we're going to have to do with the infrastructure. So we start digging somewhere and start replacing the pipes.
It's not just Flint. I would say there's probably lead pipes in every community.
Precisely.
Which is why the governor's got to start making the case for that.
You can sit there and say, well, we got to tear them all up, and over time we might, but you're not going to come up with the money from any source to do that all at once. You're talking hundreds of billions of dollars.
You are talking about tens of billions of dollars in taxes that we have got to start paying in this state. This idea that we can have everything we want and be the best that we can without paying for it is an absurd notion, and we've got to stop indulging it.
If you think we can get by with 20 and 30% tax rates in this state, that's
but other
fine.
states don't have that.
Other states have the same infrastructure problems.
They actually don't. Other states actually are attacking their infrastructure problems by having a tax code that makes more sense.
Where? Can you give us some example?
Minnesota is a wonderful example in the Midwest of a state whose tax structure is dealing with yielding not just enough money to provide services, but also investment. One of the big differences, for starters, they have a graduated income tax, which most states that you would want to live in, who have services that you'd want to have that as opposed to the flat tax. Their business taxes also make sense.
Most states that people want to live in have a 0% income tax rate.
That's not true.
The fastest growing states in the nation have 0% income tax
Well, here we go again with the idea we can have something for nothing. This is the sell on the right side of the political spectrum. We can have everything and not pay for it. It doesn't work that way.
We're paying
it's
a combined
absurd.
state and local tax rate in Michigan of 11%. What do you think that rate should be?
I think there should be a graduated rate on the income side, and I think that the business taxes hold on. You asked me a question. Let me finish it. So first of all, if you go to a graduated rate that looks like, say, Maryland, for instance, you'd have 90% of the taxpayers would get a tax break because the people at the upper end would start paying according to what they can afford, which, Maryland's a pretty good state, in much better shape than Michigan is. We also got to look at business taxes. Why do we not tax services in Michigan? Those are things that, why don't you pay taxes on greens fees and things like that? We have got to start thinking about those things in ways that make sense for the things that we need, as opposed to, well, we just don't want to pay.
All right, respond to this, Nolan, and then we're going to take another step forward.
Your own statement where you said we've got to start paying for this. What you meant is these people up here have got to start.
Well, I'm one of the people who'd pay more if there was a graduated income tax. So
we, for decades here, were among the highest income tax and business tax states in the country, and it didn't fix the things that were wrong. These problems didn't just start a few years ago.
Our infrastructure started crumbling in what, the 80s?
Our infrastructure has been crumbling for 50 years.
That's not true.
And we haven't wanted to pay for it.
All right, guys,
We've kicked this can down the road for an awfully long time.
All right, I'm going to move us forward a little bit into Flint, and I want to talk about in terms of spending money, and I want to talk about the fact that people in Flint have been complaining about that they had to pay their water bills through all of this, that they haven't been able to drink the water. And finally, you heard the mayor say earlier on in the show that the governor has set aside $3 million so that people do not have to pay their water bills. This is coming kind of late, Nolan.
It's common sense. If you're giving people a product they can't use, they shouldn't have to pay for it. You would, if you went to the grocery store and you got a big box of spoiled fruit, you wouldn't expect to have to pay for it at the checkout. I think this is common sense. When they can drink the water again, then restart the bill.
And this is still showing me that the wheels are still slow on common sense reactions to what's happening in this crisis, that should have been stopped weeks ago, if not months ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, this was a governor who was stuck in the mud on this. I think didn't think it was as big a deal as it was, didn't react the way that he would have to a crisis in another community, and so now we're stuck playing catch up. You know, he's just now moving in office to Flint to say, I've got to be there more. Really? Why wasn't that done back in the fall when we first heard about these elevated lead levels? I mean, the response here is not excusable on any level from this governor.
I want to talk about now that the Michigan Civil Rights Commission is going to be investigating whether discrimination played a part in this water crisis. The NAACP head was there on Tuesday night in Flint and had a meeting with the mayor and had a meeting with people in the community as well as the governor. And so the Michigan Civil Rights Commission is going to be conducting 3 public hearings on this. Talk about that larger issue, Nolan, and the fact that they're going to be tackling this and what you think they're going to find.
I think there's been a lot of extemporaneous showmanship in this issue. I don't think that's going to help the people of Flint one bit. I think instead of everybody out here trying to get a piece of this and press their own agendas, folks should be trying to figure out what's the quickest way to resolve this and get the people of Flint back on drinkable water. I'm not sure all this amounts to anything or will amount to anything that's going to be useful to the people of Flint or anybody else in Michigan.
But the things I keep hearing now over the last several weeks is this wouldn't have happened in Birmingham. This wouldn't have happened in Bloomfield Hills.
It would. For a lot of reasons, it might not have. But
the response would have been different in those communities, and that's where you get to the crux of a potentially racial issue. It's certainly racial. It's certainly economic, and to pretend that somehow that race and class, which play a role in determining all kinds of things in public life, not just in this state but in this country, but somehow had nothing to do with this particular.
This is driven by bureaucratic incompetence at the state level, at the local level.
But I'm not
thinking they're sitting there
there's
thinking,
not,
well, boy, we're going to be incompetent for Flint, and we're going to be incompetent.
Nolan, it's not an either or
because they're black or poor.
It's
I think
not
they're
an either
just
or.
incompetent.
But so it's just coincidence that black and poor people happen to live in communities where these problems are 10 times what they are in other communities. That's just chance?
Yeah, they tend to live in older communities with poor infrastructure.
Right. And why?
I think it also comes back then, now you're bringing into the argument about emergency management and the fact that emergency management is in certain areas and people feel that they are targeted in that way.
Well, I mean, we've been saying since the beginning that emergency management is a tool that the state has to have because of its responsibility for local finances. I mean, that's not about the emergency manager law. That's about the Home Rule Cities Act that sets up local government in this state. At the same time, it's a limited tool. It's not a tool that you can use to correct the problems that we have with disinvestment and abandonment in our cities. And we have been saying this to the governor, I can't tell you how many times. Every time we have seen him since he was been elected governor, we've asked him the same question about this. Don't we need a larger agenda to try to figure out how to better fund, how to provide more resources for our cities? And his answer has always been, the emergency manager law is enough. It's enough to do it. And I think he's not just wrong, he's abjectly wrong at this point. It's not just insufficient, it's unjust to continue to use that law without other remedies.
Do you think it's unjust?
No, it's worked in most places. It's been used, most notably the city of Detroit. I think if
Bankruptcy worked in
if we had, and you wouldn't have had bankruptcy without emergency manager.
Agreed.
There's no step to get there.
That's
without
true.
it. In this case, Flint would have had this water crisis with or without emergency management, because the local people there were hell-bent on getting off the Detroit water system and making this switch. This was pushed and driven at the local level, and I don't think emergency manager played a single role in this crisis.
I mean, that's just patently false. Of course, the emergency managers were in control of the city when the decision was made.
Pushed by the local officials who have wanted off that system
So for
a
decades, they've been told they can't do this, right? That it won't make economic sense, that it's not practical, and that's all true. Hold on,
with or without the emergency manager.
It gets approved while an emergency manager is in place. Something that everyone has said wouldn't work forever gets approved while an emergency manager is in place. I don't see how you can say that's not on the emergency manager. Of course it is.
And also the city council then voted to get back on Detroit's system, and that was overruled by the emergency management. And I think you can look at emergency management, but it all goes back to the state anyway. I want to wrap this conversation up with just a couple of thoughts of, you're watching this happen. We're reading everything that all the coverage the Detroit News has been doing. Also, the Detroit Free Press have really been on this story, and nationally as well, now that this story is spread out. And I sit there and I say, again, I go back to the trust, that how can anyone believe anything that's coming out of any kind of government official's mouth as we go forward in this process? And you understand how people in Flint are saying, I don't know what to believe, and I don't know what my life is going to be like 6 months from now.
Why would you have ever believed anything that's come out of government? We've sat here for the last decade or so looking for government solutions to everything. At the bottom line here, government is an incompetent institution. Why we keep turning more aspects of our life over to it is beyond me.
Well, one of the reasons
Yes, it's true. Yes.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons that we count on government to do these things rather than the private sector is that the public good is the motive in government, or is it supposed to be. The public good is not part of the profit motive, which drives the private sector.
Right.
And so you keep them out of things like providing clean water for people who can't afford it, making sure that the air is clean from factories that would just rather pollute. That's the role of government.
Do you think that a private company would have been this unresponsive to its customers?
Oh, are
I
you
tell
kidding?
We've got private garbage service. We went from city service to garbage service.
For people who don't have money.
Now this company's contract's on the line, and they're much more responsive than the city was.
But the issue is who can pay for that, Nolan. I mean, private companies don't serve poor areas because the people don't have any money. You wouldn't have a private company providing water to people in Flint.
Are you kidding me? Look at how much of the services in Detroit have been privatized. Certainly people are more responsive when their profits are on the line. What did these bureaucrats
They're responsive
in the
to profit, but
what did they have to fear? Their jobs were guaranteed for life.
They're
no
responsive
consequences
to
for screwing up. There's no responsiveness.
They are responsive to a profit motive that is disconnected from the public good.
What's government to? What's the bureaucracy
the public to? It's supposed to be responsive to the public good. That's the whole point of it.
Yeah, well, when's that happen?
Well, we'll have to keep watching and seeing what's going to happen in Flint. Speaking of emergency